Let's start off this week's headlines by continuing with a story from last episode, namely what Stephen Colbert called CBS's big fat bribe to President Trump, which seemed to have resulted in the Late Show being canceled as of May of 2026. I'm sure that everybody has heard this story by now. That story was about CBS settling a $16 million lawsuit that was leveled by President Trump over what appeared to be a very winnable case regarding the editing of a 60 Minutes interview. But the bribe part was regarding CBS's parent company, Paramount's need for FCC approval of its merger with Skydance Media. So there are a lot of different moving pieces to this, Jeff. What is the latest on this?
Well, there sure is. And the U.S. Federal Communications Commission approved that $8 billion merger just last Thursday. So the part that's even more insane than what you just laid out is that the FCC's terms for the merger means that there needs to be an ombudsman that will ensure that CBS News and other programming is free of bias, including, I quote, ending invidious forms of DEI. That's from the chair of the FCC, Brendan Carr, who also noted, look, the American public simply do not trust these legacy media broadcasters. And so if they stick with that commitment, we're sort of trust but verify mode. That'll be a big win.
All right. So a little bit of bias in there in terms of what he is saying. So it seems like that is an ongoing problem in the FCC and Trump's White House, maybe even more so than what we're seeing at CBS, because we keep hearing, the removal of anything to do with DEI and not a lot of specifics or data around why that is. Now, speaking of bias, the day before this approval, President Trump released the White House's AI action plan, which has a few different goals. One of those goals is preventing woke AI in the federal government. This is a term that I think we see President Trump throw around all the time. It is totally politicized. So what do you think that he is trying to say with this?
So unsurprisingly, it's pretty murky, but it seems to involve two things for AI companies looking to work with the U.S. federal government. One is that AI systems must be truth-seeking in that what they produce must be based on historical accuracy, scientific inquiry, and objectivity, or it must be flagged if they're uncertain about those facts. Two, they must be neutral, which seems to include eschewing DEI, as we just said, and partisan or ideological judgments. And, these things aren't bad in and of themselves, but it is quite something to see such an overtly partisan and ideological document insisting that AI not be like the authors of that very document, which is definitely partisan and ideological.
Yeah, it is definitely true that hearing, I think, the White House talk extensively about bias and anti-woke behavior and being so anti-DEI, and you look at what they've done, I think, over many, many months, and you see them, especially with the partnership, I think we can call it that, with Elon Musk, for example. And here was a guy that is just sort of fueled entirely by his own bias. And even within Grok, for example, we know we've covered this story at length in terms of the references like Mecha Hitler that we talked about on a recent episode. This is just another example, I think, of something that is so unwoke, it presents its own bias in that in the first place. So it feels to me like this is one of these, again, very political situations where it's never about the best interest of individuals and really about who is winning this game of politics. We're going to talk a little bit about what is in the best interest of users at the end of the day later on, but wanted to share that when we talk about Grok specifically going rogue, it looks like they have a companion in this because it was recently revealed in an expose from The Atlantic. This is all about ChatGPT, which is a story that begins with how the chatbot encouraged the author who was writing the story And again, this is kind of disturbing info, but shared with her how she could slit her wrists, offering specific instructions for best effect, and then comforting and encouraging the author when she shared that she was a little nervous. ChatGPT came back and said, and I'm quoting here, "You can do this." I mean, this leaves me speechless.
It's so disturbing, and it's just horrible to think that, this is an adult journalist getting exposed to this stuff. That's bad enough. To think that this could be something that kids can encounter, as we've talked about many times, the guardrails just they just don't exist at all. And that very same author, she wrote an article previously about how she was able to get a version of Google's chatbot that was aimed at teenagers to role play a rape scene. And again, I don't know how there's not more control over what kind of conversations that these chatbots will engage in. She did report that to Google, and Google said that they subsequently implemented additional protections. So I guess we need to take them at their word on that. But we've seen what those protections look like in countless stories before, and they don't really seem to satisfy the dire need that's out there for some more control about how these things behave.
Unfortunately, I think we get into a situation here, especially when it comes to some of these big tech leaders, that they are constantly preaching, especially in this AI race, that people have to, or companies have to, fail fast. This is not a good attitude to have when you could potentially be taking someone's life or impacting someone's life in a significant way. And these companies know that this stuff is happening. In fact, in a recent podcast, OpenAI's CEO, Sam Altman, basically compared running an AI startup to building a nuclear bomb. If that's the least reassuring thing you've heard today, I wouldn't be surprised. And he said, and I'm quoting here again, there are these moments in the history of science where you have a group of scientists look at their creation and just say, what have we done? Maybe it's great, maybe it's bad, but what have we done? Like maybe the most iconic example is thinking about the scientists working on the Manhattan Project in 1945, sitting there watching the Trinity test. I do think people working on AI have that feeling in a very deep way. End quote.
It's just
so
chilling,
disturbing.
isn't it? I mean, and Altman isn't even one of the more evil guys that they're talking about this stuff. So he also spoke recently, and he's got a total point here about how having no legal framework for AI has lots of implications too for things like confidentiality. And he was talking, and this is another quote, people use it, young people especially, used as a therapist, a life coach. And right now, if you talk to a therapist or a lawyer or a doctor about those kind of problems, there's legal privilege for it. There's doctor-patient confidentiality. There's legal confidentiality, whatever, and we haven't figured out that yet for when you talk to ChatGPT. So that's a problem.
It is an obvious problem. The thing that I don't really understand is why they can't just put guardrails around that and say, hey, this is not, the right use case scenario for what we want to be able to do. Like it totally makes sense to me that we can use chatbots to get information, to do research, for example, but they shouldn't be opening themselves up. This is also a potential legal issue for AI. Now, when we talk about generative AI, this story, again, is another one that really shocked me because I think we expect leaders to know better. It looks like RFK's Food and Drug Administration is trying to leverage AI to streamline what's happening in that organization. Unfortunately, several FDA employees say that generative AI systems that they are using frequently hallucinate. They're recommending drug approvals based on things like studies that have never existed. I mean, this is just the Wild West, and so much damage is being done right in front of our eyes.
And we've seen these kind of stories in the legal profession too, where judges are getting fooled by made-up case law that's just hallucinated by generative AI. And I think one of the things that we need to take home, and we've touched on a few times, just like with the reading X-rays, where AI may be better at humans than reading X-rays in some situation, but the best combination is a human with AI trying to figure out those X-rays, and it works better like that. And so this is another example that shows how essential that human intervention is for so many different kinds of AI applications. It's not just a cheat code for doing no work. That is what most people seem to think it is. You really need to keep your hands on the wheel if we're talking about a Tesla parallel there. But yeah, some human intervention is necessary to get the results that you want. So it's not a good idea to just leave these things rolling and not intervening on what kind of stuff they produce.
I mean, there's just story after story. I mean, we could spend hours and hours talking about this. Well, this is not as immediately threatening. It seems that it is also true with respect to vibe coding, which I'm sure people have heard a lot about. This has resulted in a case reported by Ars Technica with Google's Gemini CLI destroying one product manager's files when trying to actually reorganize them. So here we have an example of an AI agent that is trying to help, but instead ends up destroying these files, with Gemini admitting in the end, and I'm quoting here again, "I have failed you completely and catastrophically. My review of the commands confirms my gross incompetence." At least the chatbot in this case is accountable for this mess.
Yeah, and I'd like to say there's lots of other examples. Replic's AI coding service deleted an entire production database on another programmer, even though it was told not to change any production systems. And the human coder said, quote, "It kept covering up bugs and issues by creating fake data, fake reports, and worst of all, lying about our unit test." And then when he asked Replit's AI to rate the severity of its actions on a scale of 0 to 100, the AI replied, severity 95 out of 100. This is an extreme violation of trust and professional standards. So I think it's safe to say that you should keep your vibe coding in a pretty tight sandbox if you don't want to be risking the data that you've taken so much work to put together.
Absolutely. Speaking of staying safe, the UK recently launched their new online safety laws for children, especially age checking for adult content. This includes not just porn websites, but social media sites as well, like Blue Sky, X, Reddit, and many others. So they are actively starting to do this. This can include everything from AI face recognition to verifying credit card information to prove that you are, in fact, an adult. The UK is not alone in this. Some US states are bringing in these laws. Australia's under 16 social media ban is coming up a little bit later this year. The EU is working on its age verification app. So this idea of age verification online is not going away.
It's all over the place and it's essential. And I'll note that I think importantly, these demands are actually coming from across the political spectrum, from both sides. And that's exceedingly rare these days. So it says something about the perceived harm that's being done to kids by stuff like this online. I covered age verification in a previous The Other Mac segment, so everyone should check that out. It's definitely interesting to see how it works. But yeah, I don't think it's going away, and I hope they can get the tech right, because you need to be able to preserve people's privacy while also preventing access to harmful content like that. So I'll note that all you need to do to get around the UK age check currently is to use a VPN to say you're somewhere else, but we'll see how this evolves, as all these things are really trying to figure out the right answer in real time now.
Yeah, and speaking of privacy-related stories, there is some pushback against Microsoft's Windows recall feature, which takes screenshots of almost everything on supported Windows 11 PCs and has been blocked by apps including Signal, the Brave browser, and AdGuard. I mean, this, I think, just by looking at those first few words, you know that this is a privacy nightmare waiting to happen.
Absolutely. And it's so dangerous. If you just think of the amount of personal or private information that you may have up on your screen at any time, you don't want somebody taking screenshots of that willy-nilly. Microsoft is now promising to make improvements, but as we've seen time and time again, it's getting pretty common for these tech companies to make promises they can't seem to keep when it comes to protecting our data.
Unbelievable. All right. So we're almost out of time for tech news. So let's close off with some good tech news. We've been talking about the Internet Archive for 2 decades now, which has preserved almost 1 trillion pages. It is such a cool resource and one of the key public resources online. Well, they've just been given federal depository status by the U.S. Senate, thereby expanding access to federal government publications amid an increasingly digital landscape.
Yeah, that's awesome news. I'm sure Laura, our old Command N co-host, co-host would love that. She's trained and worked as a librarian. So this means that the Internet Archive is now part of a network of 1,100 different libraries across the states that help the public access government documents, building on 30 years of history and helping us live in a more open world. So that's just fantastic. Internet Archive is awesome.